Hi everyone, I should probably have mentioned this in the last video. I've uploaded a few of my old travel videos, old 6 years, from China, and time permitted, I'm going to upload a few from the Philippines as well, just for something different, also because I personally want to preserve them somewhere, just in case they accidentally get deleted. So anyway, they're just short little segments, very short, like 30 seconds or something my travels, just random things. So, yeah, wondering why they're there. They're obviously quite different from my usual videos. It's not me talking. So, this subject is something I think I've touched on before, though not extensively. I certainly don't want to make this channel all about gender issues. The battle of the sexes. I like women, and over half my friends are women, so it's not really something I want to make the central focus of this channel. Nevertheless, when I started this channel, I told myself nothing is off limits. So if I feel something is important, I will talk about it. The lighting a little bit here. That's a little bit better. So, in recent years, we've heard a lot about the incel culture. That is, these shady websites where young men gravitate to, and they breed a lot of misogyny, and they breed a very toxic way of thinking about women. And I think that there is a problem there insofar as alienated, angry young men gravitate to those sites, and you get the likes of Andrew Tate to legitimize this whole world. Now, just for the record, I've no time for Andrew Tate. I do not think he is some sort of messiah for manhood. I don't think he is a leader. I think he's just a con man. I think he is. I mean, it's kind of ironic holding him up to be a spokesman for men when he shows so much contempt to fellow men. If you're poor, Andrew Tate has no respect for you if you're financially struggling. So, and I believe in due process and all the rest of it, but I absolutely would not trust the Tate brothers at all. Um, but he's just one example. There will be less prominent people out there who are also leading young men in the wrong direction. Um, Without question, there's some very shady stuff on these websites, which teaches young men that women are basically property. It teaches that there's an entitlement to sex, and there's a lot of other things going on there. I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to spend a lot of time on those sort of sites. Um, but I think what we've seen in the reaction is kind of a mocking reaction, like these incel losers, etc., etc. And whilst I think people are responsible for their own actions, so if you get a guy who carries out a misogynistic act of violence, he's entirely responsible and he should be jailed for that. So I want to be absolutely clear about that. There's no excuses. And we have seen acts of violence on both sides of the Atlantic, beyond. In Britain, one of the most prominent things recently was the Plymouth mass shooting in 2021. Mass shootings are very rare in this country, but certainly misogyny was a motivating factor there. Also, if you look at the issue of violence, honestly, the number of women killed by men is far, far higher than the number of men killed by women. So I've always said, there has to be equality in the law. So I think violent female domestic abusers should be treated as harshly as violent male domestic abusers. Um, but really, if we're being absolutely honest, it's just not on the same scale. It's not. I mean, you could probably count on one hand the number of men killed by women in, say, a given year versus, far, far too many women killed by men. I don't know what the precise figure is, but it's a lot. It's too many. And in some parts of the world, for example, Latin America, femicide is a very real problem. In other places, such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, rape is routinely used as a weapon of war. Women are brutalized. In Ukraine, women were brutalized. In the Hamas attack on Israel, women were brutalized. So we do see this in times of war. Um, but when it gets into the battle of the sexes, um, there's not really any winners because both sides will get defensive. Women will say men don't understand our struggles, and men will say women don't understand our struggles. I think there are some areas that women are affected by more than men. I mean, for example, when it comes to sanitary products, women have to pay more. That's fundamentally unfair. If you look at the issue of justice, if we're looking at, receiving justice, rape survivors, the chances of them actually seeing the rapist behind bars is far, far too low. And I don't accept that's because, there's a problem with false accusers. I think false accusers are awful. I think they should be punished, but I don't think it's fair to say because some women are false accusers, then other women should be, you know, um, not given the benefit of the doubt because we have, for example, the Muhammad Al Fayed allegations recently, and a lot of women have come forward in that. And I do have a problem with this knee jerk reaction. Oh, why now? I made a video addressing this. The reason why now is because they weren't believed. And it is very hard to stand up to a powerful man like Al Fayed. So I have huge sympathy for women in those areas. Also on the trans issue, if it's a question of defending a woman versus aggressive trans lobbyists, who aren't above, yelling in a woman's face, as they done with Parker Posey in New Zealand last year. I will always back women. Hell, I'll back feminists in that regard. Um, I think biology does matter. I don't think it equates to hating trans people. I think it matters in terms of a whole range of things: women's changing areas, women's sports, and indeed women's prisons. So there are other areas where I'm sympathetic to feminists, but one of my big critiques of Western feminism in recent years has been its utter failure to call out its own misandry, or rather the misandrous in its midst. Now, how does this tap into the incel thing? Well, if young men are constantly hearing from feminists that they are part of the patriarchy, that they're part of the problem, um, and they're constantly being given a guilt trip, eventually they are going to get fed up with it and gravitate elsewhere. Now, I'm not for a second saying that is the only thing that motivates them to go to Intel sites. But if you get someone like Tate, who artificially looks powerful and looks, like a charismatic figure, I mean, I see through it, but perhaps an impressionably young guy in his early 20s, late teens might not. Um, if he's lonely, he's angry. Again, none of this excuses misogyny, none of it excuses actual violence, but I don't think it's good enough in Western society for the response to this problem to be just to laugh at them. What's that going to do? It's going to make them more angry, more polarized. It certainly isn't going to get them to, see the error of the ways, i.e., just because they can't get a girlfriend, doesn't mean that it's the fault of women. It may be just their approach. It may be that they lack confidence. It may be that the opportunities are simply not arising. But, they need to know that there isn't an entitlement, there isn't an obligation for women to go out with them or to have sex with them. But I think there is a problem whereby in Western society, if you look at the way, for example, virginity is treated, I'm talking about involuntary virginity here, because the word incel actually has a broader definition. Today, it's very much associated with its misogynist subcults, which that is certainly a big part of it. But the word itself actually just means involuntary not having sex. So someone who just has bad luck, there's female incels, you know, whether it's from a lack of opportunity, whether it's from confidence issues. This is different from people who are abstaining from sex for religious reasons, for example. Now, if you are in Western society and you're not getting sexual experience, say, well into your 20s or even into your 30s, or beyond, it's going to create enormous loneliness. It's going to create enormous pressure. That doesn't justify misogyny, but I think, frankly, people who think the answer is to mock them and bully them That kind of disgusts me. You get these situations where young men are in this sort of pub setting, or they think it's banter to mock the virgin in the group, the guy who hasn't had experience. I do think a lot of people boast about it. So, what I would say to any young guys out there in their teens or 20s, your friends may all boast about, your so-called friends may boast about having lots of experience. Chances are they're exaggerating or even lying. It's not as common as you think. I mean, I think also popular culture kind of gives this impression that people are just, doing it all the time. That's not necessarily the case. For one thing, people get busy. There's a lot of other distractions in life. So I really believe this strongly. The approach to the incel culture shouldn't be to mock them. This is not the same as excusing their attitudes. I think if they cross a line, they should be held criminally liable, absolutely. And they do need to be challenged on the misogyny. But I really think it's misguided to take the approach of saying, oh, well, you're a virgin, so you're a loser. Well, for one thing, this unfairly portrays all people who have virginity as all men who have virginity as being misogynistic. Many of them aren't misogynistic, they're just frustrated. There's others who, of course, unfortunately are misogynistic because they go down that path. But here's the irony: they may not be misogynistic, but when they're constantly mocked and teased, that might lead them down that path. But what I would say to them is, I get being frustrated, but often it's other men. That's the thing. The problem with this incel subculture is it is misogynistic. They blame women for the problems. They should blame other men for the mocking, because very often the cruelest bullying comes from other men. I think most women don't really mock men for lack of sexual experience. That tends to come more from other guys. You know, um, these these sort of guys who portray themselves as super successful in the bed and so on. Chances are they're exaggerating, and even if they have had some experience, what sort of person does that? It's not. Most women find that off-putting. So I am troubled by the incel culture. I'm troubled by the violence it poses. And I'm not, in principle, opposed to this Labour government treating extreme misogyny the same as terrorism, because in the worst case scenario, that could play out. We saw that with the Plymouth mass shooting, and there's been other violent incidents. So that's not, I don't think that's misplaced. In the most extreme case scenario, it could translate to terrorism. But I also think that feminists, I wouldn't say they're to blame for misogyny. A man who's misogynistic is to blame for his own attitude there. However, there are feminists, I would say, who should carry some blame for promoting misandry. I'm going to repeat that so it's not misunderstood. I don't blame feminists for misogyny, because you can't hate all women because of the bad attitude of some, right? Just like women shouldn't hate all men because of the bad attitude of some. But I do think modern Western feminism has an ugly misandrous streak to it. And far too often this gets a free pass. I've said this before, you can look at a national newspaper, you know, take any given day, and I guarantee at least one national newspaper will have a column by a feminist reporter, a feminist op-ed writer, I should say, having a rant about men, and she gets away with it. It's a quirky piece. It's empowering. There is no way a male journalist, even in right-wing tabloids, could get away with a generic rant against women. He just couldn't. It wouldn't be published. So I feel there is a problem whereby men are silenced if they dare to even criticize feminism, or if they dare to even talk about men's issues in the context of comparing them to women's issues. For example, when men, let's call them men's rights activists, talk about the unfairness of having a ministerial department for women and equality, but no such equivalent for men, they're immediately shouted down by feminists. Feminists will say, oh, but men have all the power. It's all the patriarchy. You have all the power. Well, this doesn't explain why men have a higher suicide rate, why men disproportionately occupy more high risk jobs, why men have a shorter life expectancy. And yes, there's issues that affect women as well. But the point I'm making here is I think it's fundamentally sexist for feminists to portray men as having all the luck and all the, and their go to will be, oh, but the problems men have are the fault of patriarchy. Okay, even if that's your line of argument, does it not follow if you're acknowledging that men do have problems? Is it not reasonable that there is a government representative that can address those issues? I do think there should be a minister for men. I don't think that is sexist. I don't think that's downplaying women's issues. Why are feminists against it? When that is suggested, they immediately try to shut it down. And then they'll claim that they're not misandrist. Well, that is pretty misandrist to try and silence even discussion on men's issues. I remember when the Lawrence Fox thing went on, he fell out with a journalist. I mean, his response was very, this is the problem with Lawrence Fox. He's a bit of a buffoon in terms of his response to things. Him and his buddy, responded to that by making jokes about not sleeping with her. But there was a serious issue behind that. The journalist had trivialized the point of male suicide. I understand Lauren Fox had lost friends to that. So I think there needs to be a bit more pushback against feminists when they try to downplay these issues. Um, and just to be clear, most women don't. Okay, I don't believe that most women have that attitude. Women are sisters, they're mothers. Of course they care about male suicide. But I do think there's some toxic feminists out there who have a stinking attitude to half the human race. Um, One person I would cite is Laura Proudman. Um, I think Laura Proudman, Charlotte Proudman, excuse me, my mistake. Charlotte Proudman. Apologies to any Lauras out there. Charlotte Proudman, the so-called feminist lawyer, she's just a bigot. I mean, look her up on Google. Got some fame for bringing a case against her employer because he said she was good looking, but ever since she's just been going out of her way to basically vilify men in general. I find her a pretty obnoxious person. The Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing 2 years ago, I think was quite a hallmark case. I don't think any of them came out spotless. I don't quite go along with those who say that Johnny Depp is completely innocent. I'm not sure that he was, but what was exposed was Amber Heard's domestic violence. And the fact that she is on tape saying, no one is going to believe you because you're a man, or something to that effect. Even then, some feminists were defending her, and I'm disappointed that in Britain, a lot of the press, right and left wing, were saying this is a victory for male domestic abusers, utterly disregarding what had come out in that case about her misogyny. Um, Even then, when that was exposed, or rather, not so much her misogyny, but her domestic violence, even when that was exposed, there were feminists defending her, disgracefully so, including Charlotte Proudman. So, I'd like to see a little bit pushback against blatant misandry. It's right that we call out misogyny. Misogyny should be called out. Although a bit like racism, I do think it's thrown around a lot. Disagreeing with a woman is not misogyny. Criticizing a woman is not misogyny. You see this on both sides of the Atlantic. Looking at American politics, I want Kamala Harris to win. I think she's a far, far superior candidate to Donald Trump. I want her to win. I think Trump's a danger. But I remember Anderson Cooper came out with this nonsense question before the debate. He said, "Oh, should Trump go easy on her because she's a woman?" Spare me, Anderson Cooper. That's the sort of nonsense, frankly, some men enable. Why should she get easy treatment for being a woman? That's ridiculous. I don't like Donald Trump, but I wouldn't say he shouldn't challenge his opponent because she's a woman. That's ridiculous. I don't think even Harris would say that. So sometimes it's other men who embody this misandrist, sexist attitude. Um, i.e., women should be treated differently from men because of women. There's certain circumstances. I mean, obviously, in terms of sports and things like that, the average woman is physically not as strong as the average man. That's just biology. It's just a fact. And there is a reason why there's more of a taboo with a man hitting a woman than a woman hitting a man. But frankly, decent people shouldn't be hitting each other unless it's self-defense to begin with. Um, but I hate men who beat women. I hate male domestic abusers. I hate thugs like that, and I think they belong in prison. In fact, I would advocate for tougher sentences. But there is double standards, unquestionably. I mean, women face issues, but those issues are widely discussed and covered. Men's issues not as much. In recent years, we have heard more about mental health. We've heard more about mental health awareness. We've heard more about male suicide. So at least there has been some more discussion of them. This isn't represented in government. There isn't a minister for men, and we still have a situation where these issues, when they're brought up, not on their own, but when they're brought up in contrast to women's issues, they're immediately shouted down. Um, and if you think I'm exaggerating this, look at the treatment of Will Noland at Eton College, who lost his job basically because he dared to have a seminar for his students, male students, the patriarchy paradox. Now, I watched that. He raised a lot of important questions. It wasn't perfect. I actually think it was about half an hour. He probably could have um, yeah, I forget my full analysis of that. It wasn't perfect, but I think he raised a lot of good points. He immediately lost his job because the male head teacher was such a woke card, quite frankly, that he sacrificed this guy. It would be unthinkable for a female academic giving, say, a girls' classroom a lecture on women's rights to lose her job. It just wouldn't happen. So there's absolutely double standards out there. And as a man, I stand against misandry. I'm against misogyny. I'm against men who hurt women, absolutely. But I am against misandry and I'm sick and tired of it getting a free pass. So, how does this pertain to the issue of incel culture? Well, I think the way we get these young men away from it is certainly they need to be called out for the misogyny. They need to be shown that Andrew Tate is not a god and others like him. But I also think, and they need to be held responsible if they do cross a line. But the answer should not be mocking them. So, these guys, particularly guys who think it's funny to just mock the Virgin, you can actually be contributing to radicalizing that guy. It's no joke. Um, I don't know how people will take this video, but this is my honest opinion. I do find it troubling that there is misogynistic sites out there. Women have a right to be concerned about it, and I don't blame feminists for that. But I do think the culture of misandry leads a lot of men to think there are double standards going on here. So going forward, I want, by all means, misogyny should be tackled, but misandry shouldn't be trivialized just because it may not manifest itself in violence. I mean, you're not necessarily going to get a woman going out on a violent rampage and killing a lot of men. It's rare. Joanne Dennehy comes to mind recently, but it is rare. So it wouldn't necessarily manifest itself in that way. But that constant male shaming, that constant bashing of men polarizes young men. And I think it is one of the contributing factors for a higher male suicide rate. I think men are shamed overall more than women are. Um, and that's wrong. So let me know your thoughts. I'm not coming in to this video as a sort of aggressive, hyper men's rights activist, but I care enough for my fellow men to call out misandry when I see it. And as for feminism, I believe in it in principle, insofar as I believe in equality for women and girls. I oppose misogyny. But I do have a problem with Western third wave feminism for its failure to call out the misandrous in its midst and to recognise that's the issue that people take with it. When men criticise feminism, more often than not, it's not because they're against women's rights. It's because they're sick of the misandry. They're sick of the male shaming. And it's a sloppy excuse to go, oh, but you've misunderstood it. That's not what feminism's about. Well, prove otherwise. Call out the misandrous in your midst. That's how I see it. Thanks for watching.